All right. Well, we're a little after 11:30 here, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello everyone. Welcome to Chestnut Chat. This is first time we're going to do a town hall strictly about growing. And basically the idea is you bring your questions. We have a couple of guests on here. Dan and John are going to share a couple of their tips. Noah, Cassie, Lake, myself, we all work for the American Chestnut Foundation, have grown, I think, collectively at least 1 million chestnuts, if not more. So we're here to answer any of your questions. If you do have a question, please put that in the Q&A. We will take that. Gary had asked, he said, I don't see any sound or video controls. That's correct. So at the moment, the only people who can share their video and audio are the 6 people you see here as panelists. You as attendees are unable to share at this time your video and audio. If it looks like the questions are really light in the Q&A, I may allow raise of hands and then call on you and I can unmute you. We might be able to do that, so we'll see how that goes. But for the time being, ask your questions in the Q&A. That's really what we're here to do, is just kind of see what are the lingering questions that you all might have about growing chestnuts. We have lots of other materials about how to plant them, how to grow them, how to maintain them, and the whole idea of this town hall is really to get to some of those very specific questions or get you over an inconsistency or confusing aspect that might be plaguing you in your chestnut growing. Again, I'm Sarah Fitzsimmons. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer with TACF. I work here out of our Penn State Partnership Office. Next month in May, we are going to be talking about chestnut weevil. We've got a couple of researchers from the University of Memphis, and they are going to be talking about their work to rediscover a species of chestnut weevil in the US. So that should be a really good session. Um, and then if you guys have any ideas of what you'd like to see in future episodes of Chestnut Chat, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm always looking for good ideas for content and guests. With that, we do have a couple of questions here in the chat already, and for our panelists, I'm just going to take these questions and pitch them to you, and if you want to send them right back to me, please feel free to do that. David Reagan asks, how large should the trees be before deer fencing can be safely removed? I think, Lake, I might send that one to you. What do you think about that question?
Yeah, so the standard thing they tell you is you need a fence up to 5 feet to protect from deer browse. So once a tree has sufficient leaf and branch area above the 5 foot zone, generally you're okay to remove the deer fencing protection. Um, that'll protect it from browse. However, deer also like to rub trees with smooth bark. And American chestnuts, when they're young, can have very smooth bark. So even if the tree is above 5 feet and you remove that fencing, they can still then go in there and rub the tree. So sometimes what people do is once they remove the deer fence, they get a section of the black corrugated drainage pipe and cut that down one side and kind of use that as a protector to go against the trunk. So you don't have the big fence around the tree anymore, but you just have this little pipe protector, and that'll help for deer rubbing. They don't like to get their horns into that, or antlers. I guess they're called antlers, horns, antlers. And yeah, so I say up to 5 feet is generally what's acceptable.
Thanks, Lake. And I was not anticipating on throwing the talk over to John Hempel so quickly, but John actually has one of our first growing tips about fencing. And I was down there about a month ago, and I saw what I thought was a unique and innovative way of protecting fortifying, I guess, a cage against deer. So, John, do you want to share your screen and show what you do there down outside of Pittsburgh?
Okay. So this is my um, approach. When I first get nuts from TACF, they come in little baggies, and rather than fumble around with the baggies individually to get them into pots. I take them all out at once and put them in a plastic tray. And this is just something that food came in at one point. Lay them out in a potting mix, fairly damp potting mix because they've been fairly dry, and then that gives me a chance to get around to mixing up a batch of potting mix, which is Fred Hubbard's formula 1:1:1 peat perlite and vermiculite, and I've been using that for years, and so I stick with it. And then after about a month, this is probably pretty familiar to most people what they look like after a month. And these are in a little 4x4 square at the top, tree pots, 1 foot tall variety. They're very flimsy, but they work fine. And so with this, you can get 9 of them into a milk crate, which can be found along the side of the road all over the place up here. So I'm doing the environment a favor with that too. And then going out in the field, I have a lot of problem with deer. There's a deer expressway just a couple hundred feet from this scene, which is the railroad, which is just an unimpeded corridor for deer to go back and forth. So what I have, what this is I got tomato cages from a organic farm nearby when they changed farm managers who didn't like the old manager's tomato cages, and he was getting rid of them. So I inherited something like 40 of these cages they're made out of 6-inch square concrete reinforcing wire. That's about 20 inches in diameter. There's nothing special about that. It seemed like a good size for this, and that's the size they were when I got them. But the added the value added feature is barbed wire, um, and I have this one. This tree was uh, bigger a year ago, and you'll see that in a second. Ambrosia beetle got it, and I got very mad. And then when it started resprouting, I wanted to make sure that deer wouldn't get in there. And the 6-inch square is not big enough to keep a deer's head out from getting in there and pulling a branch and decapitating the tree, which has happened. The barbed wire takes care of it. So on the left, this is about the size that tree was that ambrosia beetle killed last year. And this in the middle is the same tree that I showed you in the previous slide at the end of last year, well, just a few days ago. But one year's growth, it grew about easily 7 feet. I think it's closer to 8. So it really shot up. And when it got higher than 5 feet, then I wasn't so worried about any chance of it getting decapitated, and I took some of the barbed wire off and moved it onto another tree. But in the beginning, on the right hand side, you need protection from low stature varmints, and so there's fine mesh wire around the bottom, and this is pretty much a no-brainer. The other thing you can see in the right-hand picture is a stick running across horizontally, and that is to position the tree, and so you have an infinite possibility of positions of where you can put sticks with this reinforcing wire. Well, you can see that in the middle picture too. And the thing that I like about this is that if you have a tree tube, what I understand is when you take the tree tube off, the tree hasn't developed enough, I guess, lignification to withstand winds and things, and it flops over. So with this approach, the tree gets buffeted by winds and builds a stronger trunk to begin with. And then this is the last one. This is the on the right or on the left is my one of two pure Americans that I was all eager to be breeder trees until a couple of years ago. But again, it's got barbed wire in place. And then with these are the next two are my there's one much larger tree that I have, and then this is the size of the the next largest. These the third one of these was the one that the ambrosia beetle got. This is at the end of the last growing season, but you can see, I guess they're about inch and a half, 2 inch diameter. Now that they're larger, I've taken the barbed wire off. I don't really care if the deer eat the lateral branches. They can't pull the tree into them, and this can stay this way for a long time. Getting back to the deer browse issue, this keeps the deer from getting their antlers in there, and so I can just leave that there until I need the cage for another tree. So I think yep, that's it.
Thanks, John. I love the barbed wire. It feels very Pittsburgh to me too. Like that seems like something that would definitely be appropriate for where you're at.
And wire could have come out of a wire mill around here somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Um, all right, let's grab another question here while we're at it. Gary Jacobs says, "Oh, Gary was answering to another one. Oh, let me follow up on this one. Clark BB asks, "What about heat if you're using black PVC to protect trees from deer rubbing?" Lake, do you want to address that one?
What was the question? Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, what about heat if you're using black PVC pipe to protect the trees from deer rubbing?
Good question. I haven't seen it have negative effects on the trees, but I haven't seen it on very sites with a lot of sun exposure, so that could be a concern.
Okay. All right, Jenna Meyer says, I use 2.5-inch PVC and wire tie it, sometimes chicken wire fence pieces, all reusable. So a couple people have different kinds of versions. Oh, here's Tom. Tom Rassi says, will deer repellent work on seedlings? Um, what about mice, chipmunks, etc.? I guess, Tom, that's what you're asking. So maybe let's talk about deer repellent. Who wants to talk about deer repellent? Dan, what do you know about deer repellent?
Well, I've used various ones over the years. Some of them work. Plant skid, which was developed by the Norwegian forest industry for moose, elk, and deer browsing, and works for rabbits as well. It's blood meal with an oil added to it. It's hard to mix and solubilize, but it's supposed to last a couple months in the wintertime. I've just picked up a new material. I've not used it for browsing, but I've used it on the soil to keep deer from coming in and eating chestnuts off the ground, Chinese chestnuts and nut crop. And it worked very well to keep them out this past year. And it's called Trico Pro, and it's from Helena, and it's made from sheep fat. And it's good for browsing too. I first encountered it from some Christmas tree growers in New England that were using it, and they didn't sell it, but they were promoting it and said it was very effective.
Yeah, and I know
About
oh, sorry.
about $100 a gallon in 2.5 gallon containers.
I imagine that would cover a lot of trees too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Chandis Klinger used to use rotten egg mix. He would blend up eggs with some water and put that in a sprayer but it doesn't last past a rainfall, so that has to be reapplied. And then I've heard some people actually just use blood, not blood meal, but they'll go to a butcher shop and get like cow's blood from a butcher and spray that on. And apparently that's somewhat
You,
effective.
you can't use ordinary blood meal. I tried that because it's been cooked and it won't solubilize. So
Okay.
basically fresh blood would be something you need to use, but the oil with it in the plant skid, makes it stick, I guess, and lasts a long time. It's not cheap, but it is fairly effective. They also make a granular form that you can put on the ground. Works for chipmunks and rabbits, probably,
Mhm.
maybe some other rodents, not
Nice.
squirrel.
Gary Jacob says, I had an orchard of about 600 trees and no fencing. To save time and money, I used deer repellent only on the top few branches, and it worked quite well, is what Gary says. And Gary, that was in Massachusetts, right? I'm gonna guess that that's, um, which actually has a pretty high deer pressure.
Ever
Jenna
seen
Meyer,
Eric,
was that?
have you ever seen Eric Evans' orchard? Or up
At
in
his
the
house?
main chapter?
Uh-huh.
I was up there a number of years ago. What they use is plastic milk jugs hanging on the trees filled with urine.
Oh, who's urine?
Theirs.
No.
All all the chestnut guys.
All right.
It's a lot cheaper than $100 a gallon or barrel or whatever it was. But
Also cheaper than renting a porta john for your chestnut
yeah,
volunteer events. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Uh, Sewage sludge or tankage in container, preferably some sort like a cloth bag tied on each tree is pretty effective also.
all right. Jenna Meyer asks, do we have those beetles in Potter County, PA? I never heard of them. I'm guessing that's ambrosia beetle, and I have not seen them as far north as Potter County. I think the farthest I've seen is southern PA. They are out in Indiana. Actually, I know the main chapter had them briefly, but I don't know if they've had a reattack of them. Ambrosia beetle, especially up north, tends to only be an issue in areas where or in years where you have significant frost or freeze damage and or a very, very wet spring. That tends to be when we've seen it here in Pennsylvania. And I think when they've seen it in Maine, but I know there's a couple folks from on here from Maine, so we'll see if they come in and chat.
It's driven by stress in the plant, which it releases ethanol, and that's what triggers them to attack. So if you can reduce any sort of stress, nutritional or environmental, that will help a lot.
That's correct. Yep. And Terry Sherrick, who was our guest in February. Terry, glad to see you on here. Thank you. He says for our birch work, we use 2-foot diameter poultry wire cages, 6 foot tall, supported by 3 pieces of rebar. Upon removing the wire cages, we use the rebar to prevent deer rubbing from their antlers on the trunks. That sounds like a good idea. I'll just say with the rebar, if you don't move it and the roots grow around that rebar, you ain't moving that rebar. So we've had that happen in several orchards, especially in Maryland. Um, all right. Well, here's a Mainer, Roger Wilby. I've noticed that roughly a half of my big trees used in the Maine program are dead of blight. Are we spreading that by what we are doing? What are other chapters finding with this problem? Cassie, do you wanna address that?
Sure. So are we spreading blight by planting out hybrid trees and then them getting blighted?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. So blight is airborne, so there's no really way to control it anyway. And it doesn't just live on chestnut, so it lives on other Fagaceae species like oaks. So regardless of us putting chestnut out there, it's still gonna be there. So we're not really spreading blight by planting these trees out.
Thanks, Cassie. Um, Let's see. Eva says, to my knowledge, Eric is no longer using registered trademark man piss to deter deer. Um, but there was a really great branding opportunity there that I see is no longer out there. Thanks, Eva. All right. Peter Green says, we have about 350 lightly caged saplings in eastern Tennessee, easily browsable, and the deer browse has been surprisingly light, surprising for someone coming from New Jersey. Peter, I hear you. The deer here apparently don't prefer the chestnuts. Is there any research to support this? Do we still need to beef up our cages? Cassie, I don't know. You may be the closest to knowing what's going on there in eastern Tennessee.
Sure, sorry, let me find my mute. Who asked this question?
Peter Green?
Peter Green. Sorry, I missed the first half of it. I was
We have
I
about
was reading
350.
Mark's response
Oh,
about the
yeah.
ambrosia beetles.
Oh, okay.
Will you read it again? The
I
beginning.
sure, yeah, sure. We have about 350 lightly caged saplings in eastern Tennessee, and the deer browse has been surprisingly light. The deer here apparently don't prefer chestnuts. Is there any research to support this, and do they still need to beef up their cages?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't think, I guess I would still think deer would prefer chestnut. I mean, they prefer lots of hardwood species. I don't really know the answer to that. I think it's safer to still beef up your cages. So I would err on the side of caution of not losing your trees. But I can't really speak to the deer pressure in Tennessee.
I think it depends on where you're at. I know, so Stacy Clark, who works with us with the Forest Service, she has seen very light deer browse in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. So that may very well be the case, that it's not necessarily a preference. It's just that the deer pressure is generally low. In central Maine, where I've done a lot of field work, the deer pressure is virtually non-existent. And same thing, I do a lot of field work in New Jersey. It's insane to me that you can find a place where there's not very much deer browse. But it just depends on the overall deer pressure. So I think, Peter, if you can find how many deer per square mile you have. If you have the normal carrying capacity, which is about 10 or fewer deer per square mile, you're probably not going to find a large amount of deer pressure, or deer browse. But I agree with Cassie. Like, I would rather err on the side of safety. But you can wait and see if you have some browse, and then they'll resprout. The trees will resprout. So like what John Hempel showed, where the tree died back from the ambrosia beetle and then resprouted. Chestnut trees have adaptations to be able to resprout from limited browse. That is an adaptive quality for these trees. And so if the deer browse it, that's okay. They will resprout. The main thing you don't want is for them to get browsed over and over and over and over again, like they do in New Jersey. They will eventually exhaust their capacity to resprout. Um, let's see here. Michael Wagner says, I want to create a mixed species forest with chestnuts and other species in northeast Wisconsin. What species would you recommend? Local species or maple and oak? I plan to use grazing sheep for competition control. Noah, do you want to try that one on?
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of good species that can co-inhabit with chestnuts. They just have to have similar site preference, such as well-draining soil, acidic pH, and they can take the shade or competition or vice versa between the chestnuts and whatever species is going to grow. It depends. I mean, if you're looking for quicker growing things, you could put tulip poplar, quaking aspen, those sort of things for quick growth. Or you can, for long term, more of a healthier ecosystem that's feeding more things like deer and that, oak trees, hickory, that sort of thing could usually inhabit the same area as chestnuts.
You- did you say white pine, Noah?
Oh yeah, white pine. It's a good
I think
choice.
white pine's a really nice one. I see that especially in PA and farther north. White pine is a very popular and plus it helps acidify the soil for chestnut. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Noah, with well-drained acidic soils. Like I see people planting with walnut, for example, and they can coexist, but generally the walnut prefers a wetter site than chestnut. So if the walnut's doing really well, the chestnut generally isn't going to, and vice versa. So it's possible, and they can grow together, but I don't think you're going to have like an optimum, you know, group of trees like that.
Yeah,
And
for a food
sugar maple,
farm setup, that would
Yeah,
work great, but one's gonna not do as well.
yeah. Sorry, Dan.
sugar maple may be a good one. They tend to grow at high elevation, similar type of soils. I would suggest you go talk to Savannah Institute in Wisconsin and see what they're doing, but that's specifically for nut growing, but lots of intercropping agroforestry work they're doing.
Agreed. Yeah, good suggestion, Dan. Um, all right, let's take Eva Butler's question. Can you speak to the practice of adding forest duff from around oaks, for example, to inoculate seedling chestnuts with mycorrhizal fungi upon planting? Is this common practice, and has any research been done as to which fungi benefit chestnuts? Any of our panelists want to take that on specifically?
I don't know what research is being done, but it definitely is effective. And if you can get it from under a chestnut tree, it's even more effective. It's that mycorrhiza which prevents the roots from dying from the blight. And it's very necessary for the plant to survive. Should be inoculated right from seed sprout, in my opinion.
And I think, you know, so I think Eva's question is about forest stuff, and I know we
Yeah.
have found that. So I don't know that there's been a ton of research done on it. There's been a few papers on mycorrhizal inoculations on mine lands, on reclaimed mine lands, because those tend to be free. They tend to be sterile ground. They don't have mycorrhizae, and usually what happens is the mycorrhizae will come in their control sites where they don't directly inoculate. The mycorrhizae will come in 3 years or so, maybe 5. So I agree with you, Dan, that it's better to inoculate. And if you just get duff around a tree, you're going to be able to inoculate when you plant, because those spores will be in that duff from the mycorrhizal associations with the tree that's already growing there. But if you don't, they'll find them. They'll find the trees eventually. I think there's pretty good evidence of that.
There are commercial mycorrhizal preparations, yeah, they're pretty universal for, most tree planting. There's, only ones that are really different are from ericaceous plants, which is blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons. But you can buy those and utilize those. And there's also mycorrhizal bacterial inoculants. I use one for all my seeds now. It's called BioCoat Gold from Advancing Eco Agriculture. It makes a huge difference in the health of vegetable plants, but it should help with trees as well.
Yeah, good points. Gary Jacob says, find an old forest with existing chestnut sprouts and harvest the soil under the duff. I think that's a good tip there. Thank you, Gary. And then there was another one. Oh, Tim X says, mycorrhizae are small 1-inch gray-brown puffballs. Thank you, Tim. Gary Jacob asks, who is the forester and TACF board member from the Midwest who planted mixed forests on a large scale? That was Bruce Wakeland, is Bruce Wakeland. He was the first consulting forester in Northern Indiana. He is board emeritus of TACF and still pretty active. Let's
Dieter
see.
too.
What's that, John?
There's Bill Dieter too.
Oh, Bill Dieter. Yeah. He hasn't planted as many forests as Bruce, but Bill is very active from a chestnut and other species planting. Oops. All right. Lori Kelman, she says several questions. We have 5 trees in our backyard in Maryland. The deer quickly learned about them, so they're fenced. It took the squirrels 3 years to learn that they're delicious. Yeah. I'm surprised it only took 3 years. Usually they know it right away. Um, Let's see. Brooke Barton says, good morning. I have several wild chestnuts on top of the mountain near my house that are producing nuts, and I'm wondering if I should remove some of the trees that are encroaching upon them, or would that change the environment negatively? Some of the maple are rubbing against the chestnut branches, and I am concerned about an open wound leaving a spot for blight infection. Lake, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, sorry, that was really long. Where is it in the?
Yeah, that's Brooke Barton. And so she's wondering, she's got trees that are starting to grow around her chestnuts and they're rubbing on the bark. She's worried that it might create a wound. So I guess two questions. Is a neighboring tree rubbing on a chestnut tree bad? Will that create a wound for blight? And or should she remove those to release the chestnut tree generally? Is that a recommended practice?
Yeah, anything that causes a wound in the chestnut's going to be somewhere the blight can get into it. But the question of removing the other trees kind of depends on how valuable they are, and if they're even on your property. I'm not sure if you live in a yard, next to your neighbor, and that's their tree rubbing on your chestnut. So, be careful about that. But if it's on your property, you can make a decision as to which trees you want to prune. You want to prune the non-chestnut trees, of course, because if you prune the chestnut tree, then you're just creating more wounds for the blight to come in. So don't prune the chestnut tree. But yeah, any sort of wound on the chestnut's an area where the blight can get into it.
Yeah, and then if you, sorry.
She didn't say if they're American chestnut or Chinese. I assume they're American, but if they're growing them on other trees, it's going to make them more timber tight. And if you want them to spread more, then release them by taking those other trees out. The Chinese are going to spread a lot more and be much lower.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. John Hempel, I'm gonna give you this one. Maura Kelly asks, if you had a choice between seeding indoors and then planting out or direct sowing, oh, excuse me, which has a better track record? If started indoors, at what seedling size and time of year is it best to plant out? I'm working at two sites, one in Northern Virginia and one in Western Massachusetts. So Cassie, maybe you can address this too with your Virginia connection. So John and then Cassie.
Forgotten who it was, and also Fred Hubbard always said direct seeding is much better than growing inside. I just like watching them grow. So I do the inside root, and then it's a trouble with hardening the leaves off before you take them out and plant them. So keep that in mind with growing inside. And growing outside or even inside, I put some, for complicated reasons that I don't quite remember. I put some in the basement, thinking they wouldn't dry out as much, and mice down there ate every last one of them. So um, indoors is not a complete guarantee. There was something else I was going to mention even before you turned it over to me. I'll think of that. Maybe it was with the white pine. Somebody asked about cutting down. Do they need to cut down pine trees? Well, of course, if the pine trees are big, they're going to be shading things so much that it's hard to get the chestnuts going. But a lot of people, there seems to be a growing amount of anecdotal stories that of chestnuts doing very well on old Christmas tree farms and places where evergreens have been growing. I don't know if that's just the pH aspect or what, but throw that out there as well.
I've seen that too, John. In terms of pines, and
Yeah.
I think it's a pH thing primarily, and I think conifers are pretty well known to condition soils well for hardwoods to come in after.
Yeah. So starting off with growing a mixed pine and chestnut planting would seem to be a good idea to me if
Yeah, I think
if
it
you have
would.
enough space.
Yeah. Cassie, what are your thoughts, especially from a Northern Virginia perspective?
Yeah, I would say, okay, so it kind of depends. I like also to direct sow seed outside because it's easy. And you can kind of skip the step of sowing them inside and then planting a seedling, but it just kind of depends on what your goals are. If you're direct sowing outside, then you obviously need to be more careful of critters stealing your seed. So you're going to want to put in recommend like a short, like 3-foot tree shelter, and then I would usually like cover it with some sort of mesh too, so that things aren't raccoons and stuff aren't coming in and stealing your seed. And then in terms of timing, normally we say if you're going to direct sow your seed outside, do it like around pea planting season. So that's like late March into April. You can push that and plant like into May if you have to. Your radicals will kind of start to get like a little spindly and long by then, but that's okay. But prime time is like early spring, late March into mid-April.
I planted mine actually in June before. I'm farther north, uh, and they didn't come up for a whole month. They came up in July, and they grew a little bit less that year, but they survived. So
When did
as
you
long
sow them?
June.
Oh yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
think you don't want to put them in when the radicals have already emerged. Is that correct or
No,
no?
I choose seeds that have radicals. So that's
Okay.
yeah.
You just don't want to wait till if they're really long, there's a bigger chance that they might get damaged when you're planting them. And that's
Yeah.
why we're saying, you plant the ones that are emerged, but don't wait so long that they're hard to get in the ground without breaking them, I think is the overall message.
Yeah.
well, and as if you do keep them a long time and they start throwing out a long radical, they'll start to get woody as well, those roots. And I think that that just reduces the long-term viability. It's just not good for that. It's exhausting a lot of its energy and reserves in doing that in storage rather than getting set in the soil.
Yeah.
Uh,
Also, if you wait until the summer, the soil moisture starts to go down. And once you get into mid-July, it's too late, at least in most areas, because the soil is too dry. And the chestnuts will have a really hard time establishing a root system at that point.
yeah. And this is a good question for that Gary has. How long after planting nuts does it take for them to sprout? And I think we might have, danced around it a little bit, but I guess I'll throw out, 2 to 4 weeks, depending on if you're planting them indoors. It's usually 2 to 4 weeks. It depends on when you plant them. So if you have overwintered them since harvest time and we usually plant in early January in the greenhouse. And if the temperatures are right and the soil moisture is right, they'll start sprouting pretty quickly. Noah, you saw some it took a longer time for some of the nuts this year to germinate. Is that right? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, some of our seeds we planted in our greenhouse, we typically do that towards the end of January just so we can get a good start on the seeds for the year. But some of them, didn't make any top growth for, even a month later. I guess they put all that energy into the root. And when the conditions were more favorable, they decided to sprout that top shoot.
Yeah, same thing. We had late germination this year in Virginia. I would say like up to 6 weeks. So I would say it's like very variable. Don't give up if it's been 4 weeks and you're like, why is my chestnut not sprouting? Sometimes it just takes longer.
Well, and usually I recommend you go in and I recommend a very careful sort of dissection of the soil and just kind of very gently get down in there and give a tug on the chestnut. If it's in there, that means the root's set. It's just waiting to send the shoot up. If you get down in there and you squeeze the chestnut and it squeezes, it has a lot of give, then it's molded and it's no good and it's not gonna sprout. So it's fine to do that. The nuts will be fine even if you go in and you excavate a little bit gently.
Yeah,
Um,
if you go in and dig around just to check the radical, make sure if you're digging in and it feels like, mud, then way too much water for them. But, if you dig in, the top inch shouldn't be too wet at all, really.
Agreed. Thanks, Noah. Um, I see Lake typing this out, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Gary Barefoot says, I don't have access. Well, it just went away, but he was saying he didn't have access to mycorrhizae, and he said there was a product. Lake, you just typed that out. Do you wanna say that just for the good of everybody?
Yeah. So when we say like inoculate with mycorrhizae, if there's mycorrhizae many different species of mycorrhizae living in the forest and naturally in the soil. And so if you take, chestnuts are most similar to oaks and pine trees and the types of mycorrhizae that they associate with. So if you go to any oak or pine trees and just remove the top organic layer of the soil that has some of their mixed in with the soil, some of their broken down leaf matter or needles. Pine duff is the needles, but it can work with oak leaves broken down too. And you just mix that in with the whole when you're planting chestnuts. That should be enough to provide the inoculation that you're looking for. If you're doing that on a large scale, that could be not feasible. So when we do our plantings, we sometimes use something like Pro Mix, which is a peat mix that has mycorrhizae already mixed in there. But you don't need that. You just need to collect some sort of natural forest. The top layer of some natural forest soil should be enough to actually inoculate.
Excellent. Thank you, Lake.
Somebody was asking about when to remove the nut.
Oh,
And I was going to mention that too. If you're setting seedlings out to harden them off, if the nut is still attached and you put them out where probably even blue jays can, if they figure it out, they'll go for the nut. So I've heard after the third set of leaves is you can remove the nut. Is that right? Or
Cassie, what do you say about that one? Do you guys do that in your seedling plantings?
No, no,
Yeah.
but I know. So I don't like to remove. So if I can easily remove it, then I will. If I'm having to like work to remove it, then I think it's too early. Is kind of how I go by it.
We have gone through because we've had some very bad rodent invasion in some of our plantings. So we have gone through. So if we plant in January in the greenhouse and then outplant in May or June, we have gone through and clipped the chestnuts off. So Cassie, to your point, they weren't pulling off easily. We just used a pair of scissors. And so I mean that was fine. I think 5 months, that's I think more than 3 leaf flushes, John, but that's what we've done. I don't know that anyone's ever actually really looked at that closely. I think the longer you can keep it on, the better, right? Because then
I
that's
figure,
feeding energy into it.
yeah.
But Tom Rassi says, a comment in Northern Indiana, my father said, never plant trees in a month that doesn't have an R in it. I hadn't heard that, but it seems like pretty good advice.
What they say for eating oysters.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
There's something about oysters too.
Yeah. There you go. JB Welch says, I first heard of TACF from Dr. Alan Weekly while taking his local flora class at UNC. He directed students to check out TACF and told us the history of the species. Thank you, Dr. Alan Weekly. Dr. Weekly is the curator of the UNC Herbarium, and I wanted to know if there are any collaborations between TACF and the UNC Herbarium or North Carolina Botanical Gardens, since Castanea dentata has historically been a cornerstone species in North Carolina. I believe it is, but do any of you all know specifically about what that connection might be? I know we've worked with both of them, and in fact, I think we've had a couple of showcases at the North Carolina, is it the Arboretum or Botanical Gardens there in Asheville? And we're gonna have another collaboration. We're gonna have a meeting there in October. I think it's October 4th, right? Is that right, Cassie? Does that sound right?
That sounds right. That's the Arboretum.
Oh, so not where are the Botanical Gardens? Is that in Chapel Hill then? Or is that UNC Asheville?
I do not know.
Says
Yeah.
to Nashville.
Yeah. Okay. But I know if maybe some of our Asheville counterparts will answer that in the chat. But I know there have been some collaborations, but we'd certainly like to do that more as well. Winston Davis says all seeds were stratified last October to December. We've had 80 to 90% success with them, providing seedlings now 4 inches tall to date. What about the fishing line concept at approximately 18-inch to 4-inch height around the area? Fishing line. Winston, is that for deer? And do any of our panelists know about using fishing line?
Yeah, he's asking about deer, Sarah.
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Lake?
I haven't used it. Has anyone else used fishing line for deer?
I've seen it used and sometimes it's effective. You know, it spooks them because they don't see it. Did not work very well and on to surround the whole garden. I've seen it on tree plantings on wooden stakes, but then you got all this plastic left in the woods afterwards, and it didn't seem to be long term enough to get the trees to the point where they were up and effective. Outgrowing it, and so they were both deer damage.
That sounds good. Thanks, Dan and Tim, or Lake. Lori Kelman asks, does anyone have suggestions for how to keep squirrels off trees once the nuts are ready to harvest? Oh, that's a good one. Uh, anyone want to take that, Cassie? You do?
No, I was gonna say I wish. I don't.
Anybody?
I thought I had an answer. I used camphor crystals to keep them out of fruit trees because I've heard mothballs were effective, but they're much too toxic and should never even be using them in your house. And it worked for the first season when I had them migrating from cherry trees into the pear trees when the pears were very small. Kept them out that year. The following year, it didn't work. So I thought I had the answer, but no.
Yeah,
A 20, shotgun and son sitting out there and eating the squirrels, that's your best bet. Trapping will work in urban areas. I live trapped them for Chinese chestnuts. They were in the trees 2 weeks before the chestnuts started dropping. I baited the traps for a couple of times after that. They just continued to go in with no bait. I was baited with sunflower seeds. Live trapped 30 squirrels out till the end of the season. And there was still one, I trapped at the last time there was still a nut in the tree. And I moved those all out and emptied the neighborhood. And then the following year, I had chestnuts. But that year, the only way I could get chestnuts was shaking them, going up in the trees, shaking them down in the burrs, taking them in the garage and letting them open up and then harvesting them. Counted weighed what nuts I got out of there, counted the burrs, picked up all the empty burrs on the ground, counted those and extrapolated. They got 90% and I got 10%. If it was the other way around, it would have been fine. I got 9 pounds of chestnuts. They got 90 pounds of chestnuts out of 2 trees. But can't totally complain because I wouldn't have had chestnut trees in the suburban area if they hadn't brought them over and planted them from my neighbor's trees.
That all makes sense, but I think yeah, that's about all we can do right now for squirrels. I remember Fred Heber always, I think it was Fred, he would say, to if you wanted to get nuts from a specific tree, especially like an isolated tree in the woods, he would leave an offering of Chinese chestnuts at the base of the tree, like as a distraction, I guess. Be like, hey, look, a distraction, and then you can go up and get. I don't know how well that worked, but it's a funny story anyway.
I did also try putting rat traps up in the tree, and it was heard that was a way to catch squirrels. Only ones I caught were the flying squirrels, so I immediately stopped that. But they travel through the treetops and not across the ground to get into the trees. So if you can isolate a tree and have a large, straight enough trunk and no branches close enough to the ground, and you put a sheet metal guard around the trunk, that'll keep the squirrels out. But they can say as long as they can't jump in from another tree.
Yeah.
But
Um,
you can keep the flying squirrels out.
It looks like Jenna agrees. She says squirrels on trees, bang, bang. I'm guessing that's agreeing with the 22 there. David Chalfont says fishing line can damage wildlife. Don't use if there are other options. That sounds like that's probably good advice too. Tim X says one person determined from albino seedlings that about the 3-leaf stage, the nut no longer gives sustenance. So I think, John, that's to your point about the third flush, I guess, and maybe that's where that's coming from.
And as far as planting them, wasn't it Candace Klinger that always said the best way to plant chestnuts is to just take a gallon bucket of them and put them out in the forest and let the squirrels plant them?
I think that's the easiest way to do it, that's for sure. Tom Rassi says, comment, don't ever use Roundup 365 around the base of chestnuts. Somebody thought it would be easier than to mow and lost all the catkins. Roundup 365 can volatilize. That stuff is pretty noxious stuff. I don't know, Noah, you may be our most herbicide and pesticide knowledgeable panelist. Do you want to speak to any of that?
Yeah, usually if you want to go around chestnut trees with something like Roundup, active ingredient glyphosate, definitely keep to the lower percent. You might not kill every weed, but it's much better than killing your chestnut tree, in my opinion. But it depends on the soil too. I know I've seen a few cases where someone actually mulched around a tree with rocks, which I wouldn't do that to begin with. But if you spray Roundup on rocks, there's no organic material to counter that before it drips right to your tree's roots, and that'll kill your tree. So depends on the time and place. Just be careful with it, especially with the chestnut trees.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
365 has more in it than just glyphosate too. It's got imazapic, it's got diquat. I think some of them have triclopyr. So there's herbicides that do different stuff. Like glyphosate's very specific, foliar context, systemic herbicide.
Lots of organic herbicides out there that are much less damaging, but they're not very effective on perennials unless you're constantly burning them off to reduce the nutrient level in the root. But you got 30% vinegars, you got fatty acids. There is one from Natria that has a malic hydrazide in it. It's less toxic type of material, but it does kill the root as well as burn the top off. Ones with clove oil. Final sand is one of the more effective ones and price effective as well.
Nice.
There was an herbicide a good number of years ago that I think it was Lowe's had. It was as near as I could tell, the only active ingredient in it was ammonium phosphate, which seemed like a good idea to me because it's going to break down to ammonia and phosphate. But have you ever heard of that? It seems to have disappeared.
Ammonium sulfamate, it was, and I can't find it anymore. Apparently, even you would think it was relatively innocuous in breaking down. It must have had a more toxic byproduct or something, and they took it off the market, or it was just hard to uh, get an EPA registration or something. You used to use it on apple trees specifically for poison ivy.
Yeah, that's
I
what I
haven't
was
seen it
using it
for
for.
20 years.
Maybe the other problem was either they couldn't patent it or it went off patent.
Yeah, or it was too cheap.
Yeah.
Um, I got a question here from Ken Steben, or Staben. We have 15 American chestnuts from TACF seeds and also some bare root seedlings. One tree has what might be blight. How do you diagnose blight, and is there a way to treat it? Who wants to take that one?
Is there a page on the TACF website about that?
About like mud packing and stuff?
No, just diagnosing blight.
There isn't, but I was talking with our web administrator Hal about this actually yesterday about getting a site to do that. It sounds like there is a call for that. I have a site about blight on my Penn State's website. I'll put a link to that. It's not specifically about diagnosing blight. It's fairly easy to see and notice. It's a big orange canker. I don't know, Cassie, you've seen
Yeah.
a bunch. How would you describe it and say what to look for?
Yeah, so it can take a couple different forms. Some are more obvious than others. On seedlings, maybe sometimes it's a little bit harder to tell, but I would say the orange coloration is like the most obvious giveaway. So blight or Cryphonectria parasitica produces these spores that are orange in color. And so on your bark, you'll see kind of this orange coloration. And then another side effect is what we call cankers. And so these basically look like big scabs or scars on the tree. And sometimes they can be kind of swollen, like the trunk is kind of like ballooning out or trying to scab over. And then sometimes these can take the form of being kind of sunken, like the tree is kind of caving in. So it can look different ways, but if you're having a lot of like scars on your bark, or you're seeing any like orange spots or orange coloration, I would say are kind of the main things to look for. And then how do you treat it was a question. So yeah, mud packing um, is something that can help your tree. So basically like carving out the infection as much as you can and then packing it with soil from around the tree. So chestnut blight doesn't affect the root system of trees because of the diversity of the microbiome in the soil. And it somehow protects the trees some like on the, when you apply it, kind of like a Band-Aid to the bark. So you can collect some soil, add mud to it and stick it on the tree, kind of like a big bandage. And that can help. It's not going to like totally cure it, but it can reduce the severity of the blight going forward. Besides that, you can use some fungicides, but there's not a lot of like research to support that. It's something we're studying at our Meadowview Research Farms. So yeah, that's the struggle. That's why we exist. It's not so curable.
Yeah, I guess we'd be out of jobs if blight was easy to diagnose and cure.
Since we're on blight, just a quick little one. When we're talking about trees rubbing each other and creating bare spots with those tomato cages that I have, some of the lateral branches go out and touch the wire and rub in the wind, and then I got a lesion there, and I got worried that this is no good. It's going to create a site for blight invasion, but I've never seen that. And so for whatever the mechanism is, I don't know if the branch dries out enough at that spot that it doesn't support blight invasion or what. But I've never had any problem that I could tell with branches rubbing on wire and creating a site for blight. So for what it's worth.
Thanks, John. Let's see. Will says, has anyone found a way of creating an exhibit sample of a blight infected branch with lacquer that retains and displays the orange coloring? Our learning boxes have that. I mean, I've had a chestnut, so we have a chestnut blight stem, and we generally take them out of our seed orchards where we inoculate many small branches. And I don't know what they spray them with. I think it's just a high gloss clear paint, right? Isn't that what we spray them with, Cassie? Do you remember what they did there at Meadowview to do that?
Spraying them, this is for, what is this for?
The learning
SSA.
boxes?
Oh, I
The
don't
You'd
know.
excess
probably want a
stems?
matte finish, wouldn't you?
The ones I think we have in our learning boxes are shiny, but maybe a matte one would work better.
Yeah.
But I mean, any sort of lacquer or something that seems to be very effective. And so usually what you want to do is cut down the stems, let them dry out almost completely, so that the blight is dead and that you don't get any sort of moisture retention once you shellac or lacquer it. And that has worked pretty well. The orange is never as vibrant as it is in the tree and in the wild while it's still alive and being eaten, but it retains the orange character. It's noticeable. Um Lori has a comment, I think it's a good one, about deer. They have sensitive lips, so keeping them from eating something is pretty simple. Cover it with something annoying, anything from plastic fishnet, like coverings, to the barbed wire mentioned earlier from John. Keeping them from rubbing, chestnut trees needs more. Deer in our yard lean on the fencing around the trees, eat as many leaves as they can reach. The deer love chestnuts so much that they sleep on the ground around the fencing. Many lists of what deer love to eat list chestnut as number one. That's my experience. I don't know. Do you guys agree, disagree? Any other comments on that one?
And I just did something, I Googled chestnut blight bark identification and hit images, and I got all sorts of pictures of what what blight looks like on bark. So
Good.
chestnut blight bark identification, Google images.
Thanks, John. Um, let's see. Mora says one suggestion is to use soap as a deer repellent. Does that actually work? I'm skeptical. Any downsides? Would the soap soak into the soil? And I think it was Gary Jacob, he actually had a chat in here that the Massachusetts chapter has done that they use the little hotel soaps and hang them on the trees. I remember the Leffels, I think, in Pennsylvania, they swore by Irish Spring in particular.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody on the chat said Life Boy, but Irish Spring is what I've always heard.
Same.
but I mean I've never studied it. I don't know of any studies that have looked at it directly. Um,
Pretty effective, but it's fairly odorous Irish Spring. I don't think most soaps, break down relatively easy as compared to detergents. So it's probably not a major issue on soil.
yeah, I'd say that's true. Um, Alex Mann says, Sarah, I know of a large 50 plus or minus year old chestnut tree in Park Forest Village State College, which is where I live. It is near my childhood home, actually also near where I live. Do you know of the tree? I don't. There's some Chinese chestnuts there in Park Forest in the village per se, or in the village. There are wild Americans just in that woodlot south of State College Elementary or Park Forest Elementary, and then thousands of American chestnuts, a few large, over in Game Lands 167. I suspect that that specific one on Norwood Lane is a Chinese chestnut, though. There are a few there in the neighborhood. It produces immature chestnuts each year, but the current owner said that some years the nuts become mature. Um, Tom Rassi says, how can you get a hold of hypervirulence? Research in Michigan State, but haven't seen any. I think hypervirulence has pretty much, most of the research has stopped for a couple of reasons. One is that it's been very difficult to get it to work. And then number two, the permitting process of being able to send blight around I mean, imagine trying to say, I want to send a lethal pathogen around, even if it is a controlled lethal pathogen. Generally, the plant pest control folks don't like that. Cassie, we had a conversation about that on a science call recently. Do you remember any more about the hypervirulence research conversation that we had?
No, essentially what you've said, regulations are really strict. And so the trees that they do inoculate with hypovirulence too, you have to cut them all down. So it's a hard thing to study because of the regulations surrounding it.
Yeah. Thanks,
But
Kenzie.
some
So it has
work
to
I
be
think is still
strain
being done.
matched.
I think some work is still being done at WVU.
Yeah, and a few other universities are too, but I think as far as like, excuse me, large scale, like at what it used to be, it's far reduced. And even at Michigan State, I don't know that they're doing any research on hypervirulence at Michigan State anymore.
We're talking
Uh,
about the super donor strain.
just hypervirulence in general, but super donor certainly is part of that.
Super donor.
Super donor. Yep. That's at WVU. So, John, you had mentioned, well, you have to match the strain. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges is if you don't have a super donor, a donor that can pass the hypervirulent virus on to any strain. Otherwise, you have to isolate the strain that you have from your tree and then get get that matched up with a hypoviral isolate. Like,
Yeah, there's more going on than just hypoviruses too in some of these cankers that display slower rates of infection. There's a study done on the chestnuts in Salem, Wisconsin, um, where they looked at what was actually growing inside. They culture things from the cankers, and they did find hypervirulence in some of the cankers, but they also found other microorganisms like trichoderma present in the cankers, um, and other types of microorganisms that I'm blanking on right now. But it's kind of a complex uh, system, and that's why it's so difficult. Another reason why it's so difficult to study, because when you have multiple organisms infecting or being present within a canker, it's hard to tell what's doing what.
we had a really good chestnut chat. I think it was January or February of 22 or 23. If you go to the chestnut chat archives and look up cruddy bark or complex cankers, Mark Double joined us for that. And who else? We had a couple other folks join us to talk about the complexity of cankers, and just getting it to exactly what you were talking about, like. Um,
In Europe, there's preliminary evidence that they can use trichoderma to slow down some chestnut blight infections on European chestnut, but it hasn't been tried on American chestnut. And of course, European chestnuts have a little bit of resistance in them already. So, yeah, it's a really complicated situation. We're going to try, if we can find it, we're going to try using trichoderma in the conservation orchard at Penn State to see if we can utilize that. But I don't know of anything that's commercially available in the United States yet. We're still looking.
yeah.
I found a few sources like made for spraying grapevines, but I'd say give it a shot. See, it's not gonna harm the tree. Might help, hopefully.
All right. We're starting to get to the end of all the questions here. Let's see. James Jessup says, I have planted about 300 chestnut trees in the past 7 years. I had one of them produce chestnuts. Chinkapin nuts were hollow, thinking because it was not pollinated. It is about 12 foot tall right now, and I probably have 30 that are between 6 and 8 foot tall, mostly other than chinkapin, hoping for cross-pollination. So it sounds like planting both chestnuts and chinkapins, but they're not pollinating one another. 7 years is a little early, for really good cross-pollination. I mean, it certainly can happen. You just need to make sure that you have full sunlight to all your trees, that they're happy trees, that the fertilization is right. I don't know, Dan, you have any comments on that? I guess maybe either nutrition for pollination and or
Pollination, if you're getting actual catkins and female flowers, then it may just be a pollination issue because they're probably not self-fertile, but you can increase pollen quality by boron applications. That's what I'm doing just to get better pollination, bigger fruit or nut size, and increased fruit set. And then it actually is controlling chestnut weevil as well.
You use for boron, just borax or?
Yeah, you can just use for if you have a few trees, you can use mule team borax, the laundry material.
Uh-huh.
But you're targeting 3 parts per million in the soil on a soil test, which is 6 pounds per acre of actual boron. But it's just minimal amount for a tree. You only need about a quarter of a pound. Yeah, it's a quarter of a pound per 1,000 square feet. That's like 2/3 of a cup for the mule team borax. And you preferably apply it with 200 pounds of gypsum per acre, and that equals about 4.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. boron is necessary to get calcium to move into the plant, but calcium is also the antidote for too much boron, which can be toxic. So you put the two on together and then you don't have problems with it. Can also put it on foliarly with certain materials. Soluble is one material that is made for that, but it's if you get one that's biologically linked, it's much more effective with a lot less material. It's usually like 2% boron, but most of your mine boron materials are about 10% boron, and they can go right on the ground. It takes about 60 days till the uptake on those, but applying smaller amounts spring and fall is probably more effective.
So maybe we can follow. Oh, sorry, John.
Is boron typically included in micronutrient mixtures of? I have a bag of some micronutrient, but it's so old that what's in it has deteriorated. I think it's Peters is, I think, the brand.
Maybe they tend to limit it because they think it's too toxic, but we really don't have enough of it almost all soils east of the Mississippi because it's so water soluble, it washes out of the soil constantly. And it really needs to be replaced on a regular basis for all crops. It's extremely, effective for plant nutrition. Help all the sugars in the plant also to move down into the roots to feed the microbiology through exudates.
That's interesting.
Well, I think maybe keeping on this topic, Gary Barefoot says, what is the best type of fertilizer to use on seedlings? And there might be 6 different answers to that. Dan, you want to keep on that and say what your favorite is, and then maybe we'll go to Noah, see what his favorite is.
For seedlings, I would just go with a good quality compost and no acidulated fertilizers at all. High analysis. I don't think you need anything like that. Not initially, and rock minerals that are slow release over time, and just use basically really pushing your biology to release the geology in the form the plant can use. Most soils have everything they need, and if you have good biology, you'll have all the nitrogen you need as well. 28 tons above every acre. Did you ever see anybody fertilizing the forest with nitrogen? Don't need Haber-Bosch process with high energy and solubility. Most of that soluble nitrogen gets put on cornfields, is lost before it's ever used.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, most fertilization is not necessary, even certainly not in the forest, but definitely not in orchards. We generally do soil tests just to see if the soil is good for chestnuts to begin with. There might be some really wild uh unbalance of a site where you might want to add fertilizer, and certainly if you do apply like a Miracle Grow or a Osmocote or something, they will respond to that and they will grow faster. But is that really something you want in terms of more vegetative growth? Noah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it largely depends on your end goal, because if you're trying to get the tree outside and planted the same year, I wouldn't worry about fertilizing it in the pot per se. What we do at Penn State here is we'll actually mix in a form of Osmocote slow release, and then a real tiny bit of micronutrient, also slow release. So that's already in the soil, and you're not worried about, putting any application on of uh, fertilizer. And typically you're looking at using the rate for woody plants. If you use anything more than that, you're gonna have issues with the chestnut overgrowing and not being able to support its weight. or fertilizer burn and killing the chestnuts. So it's that fine line. But if you're not keeping them in pots for 2 years, I just get them outside is the best thing you can do for them.
I'd suggest adding kelp meal, very good source of micronutrients already chelated, and it pushes mycorrhiza as well. And a new thing about Osmocote and slow releases, they're coated with polymers which are breaking down into microplastics which the plants are absorbing.
That's good to know. Thanks, Dan.
That's only came out in the last week.
Oof, jeez. I have to look into that. Well, that's most of the questions, and I see I see that Russell has his hand up, and seeing as though he is our he has perfect attendance on this. Oh, he put his hand down. But I was gonna call on you, Russell, in case you had anything to say. But maybe you just wanted to say hi. Well, I think that will pretty much do it for us. I really want to thank you all for joining us today. Many thanks to Lake, Dan, John, Noah, Cassie. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and information about growing. Thank you all for coming and asking your questions. If you liked this particular session, please let me know. We'll do it again in the future. Join us in May for Chestnut Weevils, and again every third Friday in every month. John, did you have something else to say?
I was going to say, do we want to throw out just a little teaser with the metabolomics that what's his name, Dan Shaplinsky,
Tim Shaplinsky?
Tim, um, that there's some exciting things in the pipeline.
Oh,
Since
there's plenty of exciting things in the pipeline, and I hope to have Tim on as a Chestnut chat guest as well. If you, I mean, if you want to use the last, 5-10 minutes to throw anything out about metabolomics.
just in 30 seconds, just that
Okay.
that they're finding some things that sound very exciting using mass spectrometry to monitor metabolites between American and Chinese chestnuts, and it looks like a couple metabolites involved in lignification. There's a differentiation between American and Chinese, and this could be something involved in blight resistance. And from my perspective, the neat thing about this is it would afford a way of looking at advanced backcross trees to select which ones show promise, and also to focus on what genes are involved. So stay tuned for that.
Thanks for that teaser, John. So yeah, I hope to have that as an upcoming topic, and we can go way more in depth on there. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy spring as it hits us all, and we'll see you in May. Take care.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.